Oh, Drag, it's gonna be one hot mother today.
Hello everyone, welcome back to the channel. Welcome to the channel if this is your first time. This is a series of videos I'm doing where I'm properly exploring every single episode of the Twilight Zone. So 156 episodes, and I'm taking them mostly 6 episodes at a time. This is part 13, so I'm literally halfway through because I'm going to end up with 26 videos. So at the end of this, I'm going to do a reflective video on rewatching these episodes again recently and how I feel about it and stuff, and that'll be really cool, I think. So I'm going to do that after this, but for now it's another 6 episodes in season 3 of the Twilight Zone, and we're starting off with an episode called The Grave. So The Grave begins with this opening narration. Normally the old man would be correct. This would be the end of the story. We've had the traditional shootout on the street, and the bad man will soon be dead. But some men of legend and folktale have been known to continue having their way even after death. The outlaw and killer Pinto Sykes was such a person, and shortly we'll see how he introduces the town, and a man named Connie Miller in particular, to the Twilight Zone. So The Grave was written by Montgomery Pittman. So he'd already written for the Twilight Zone, so he's becoming a bit of a mainstay in the crew, which is great. And this one had a really interesting cast. This episode, it had the main part was played by Lee Marvin, but there were other parts played by Lee Van Cleef and James Best and Strover Martin. So Lee Van Cleef, obviously you'll know from the Dollars trilogy and tons of stuff, but also James Best you might know mostly, possibly, from the Dukes of Hazzard, because he played Roscoe P. Coltrane, which is like a legendary role that he played. But it's beautifully cast. The characters they're playing absolutely suit their acting style. It's a really interesting atmospheric episode, which is basically a ghost story. And this gunslinger at the beginning of the episode gets killed by the town collectively, which is really interesting. They don't want to have any particular blame from one person killing them, and they collectively kill him. And he's buried in this grave, in this graveyard, and they are really suspicious of it, and they don't want to go there. And Lee Marvin's character, because he's kind of it upsets his sense of machismo or whatever. He's like, no, I'll go there, you know. And yeah, it's really cool the way it plays out. And there's a suggestion, the thing that happens to him at the end of the episode, there's a suggestion it's a coincidence from one of the other characters, but then the widow of the one that died says that the wind is going in a different direction, and it couldn't possibly be that it was a coincidence. It just doesn't tally with the direction of the wind. So there's a suggestion it was the dead man's ghost. So yeah, really good episode, I thought. And yeah, it's a good way to start this little batch. And then you've got one of the most famous episodes of all time, quite rightly. It's one of the best 25 minutes of television you're ever going to see. It's an incredible episode called It's a Good Life. Okay, so It's a Good Life begins with this opening narration. Tonight's story on the Twilight Zone is somewhat unique and calls for a different kind of introduction. This, as you may recognise, is a map of the United States, and there's a little town there called Peaksville. On a given morning not too long ago, the rest of the world disappeared, and Peaksville was left all alone. Its inhabitants were never sure whether the world was destroyed, or only Peaksville left untouched, or whether the village had somehow been taken away. They were, on the other hand, sure of one thing: the cause. A monster had arrived in the village. Just by using his mind, he took away the automobiles, the electricity, the machines, because they displeased him. And he moved an entire community back into the Dark Ages, just by using his mind. Now I'd like to introduce you to some of the people in Peaksville, Ohio. This is Mr. Fremont. It's in his farmhouse that the monster resides. This is Mrs. Fremont, and this is Aunt Amy, who probably had more control over the monster in the beginning than almost anyone. But one day she forgot. She began to sing aloud. Now the monster doesn't like singing, so his mind snapped at her, turned her into the smiling, vacant thing you're looking at now. She sings no more, and you'll note that the people in Peaksville, Ohio have to smile. They have to think happy thoughts and say happy things, because once displeased, the monster can wish them into a cornfield or change them into a grotesque walking horror. This particular monster can read minds, you see. He knows every thought. He can feel every emotion. Oh yes, I did forget something, didn't I? I forgot to introduce you to the monster. This is the monster. His name is Anthony Fremont. He's 6 years old, with a cute little boy face and blue, guileless eyes. But when those eyes look at you, you better start thinking happy thoughts, because the mind behind them is absolutely in charge. This is the Twilight Zone. Okay, so It's a Good Life is written by Rod Serling, based on a story by Jerome Bixby. And it's just phenomenal. It's absolutely phenomenal. The acting from everybody is just perfectly pitched. And it's just such a fantastic concept. In the introduction and in the previous advert, because the Blu-ray box I've got shows you the adverts for the forthcoming episodes from Rod Serling as well. And he talks about a monster. But a monster, in this case, is a 7-year-old boy. And that 7-year-old boy, Anthony Fremont, is played by Bill Mumy. So another appearance from Bill Mumy. And I really like Bill Mumy. I've said it in a different episode of this, a different part of this, different video of this, that I really like Bill Mumy in general. So it's nice to see him doing a part that's so iconic. It's so famous. And it's just so brilliant. So yeah, he's the monster. Whatever he wills can happen. He can will things to happen. And everybody is frightened of him. All the adults around him are frightened of him. He doesn't like any kind of negative conversation. If anyone stops smiling or saying bad things or negative things, there's a risk that he'll do something horrible to them or send them to the cornfield, which he often does to people. He sends them to the cornfield. That's kind of like a go-to. And he hates the dog barking, or dogs barking in general, and he sent some dogs to the cornfield. And there's a dog barking in this episode as well. And yeah, it's really sinister. It's really eerie. It really does run with this concept as well. And there's a really nasty bit at the end, which is quite shocking. And yeah, it's done with kind of camera tricks or whatever. It's just such an amazing one-off piece of TV that, you know, if you're going to recommend 3 or 5 episodes for someone to say, well, what is this Twilight Zone? You definitely pick It's a Good Life. Such an amazing episode. So the next one is Death's Head Revisited. This one's written by Rod Serling, and you can tell it's written by Rod Serling because this is another part of his sort of passion scripts against the Nazis, against totalitarianism, against dictatorship. But actually, this is specifically about concentration camps and an SS officer that ran it. And ultimately, the Twilight Zone takes revenge on an SS officer that was in charge of a concentration camp. That's essentially what this episode is. Okay, Death's Head Revisited starts with this opening narration. Mr. Schmidt recently arrived in a small Bavarian village which lies 8 miles northwest of Munich. A picturesque, delightful little spot, one time known for its scenery, but more recently related to other events having to do with some of the less positive pursuits of man. Human slaughter, torture, misery, and anguish. Mr. Schmidt, as we will soon perceive, has a vested interest in the ruins of a concentration camp. For once, some 17 years ago, his name was Gunther Lutz. He held the rank of a captain in the SS. He was a black uniformed strutting animal whose function in life was to give pain, and like his colleagues at the time, he shared the one affliction most common amongst that breed known as Nazis. He walked the earth without a heart. And now former SS Captain Lutz will revisit his old haunts, satisfied perhaps that all that is awaiting him in the ruins of the hill is an element of nostalgia. What he does not know, of course, is that a place like Dachau cannot exist only in Bavaria. By its nature, by its very nature, it must be one of the populated areas of the Twilight Zone. And it's very powerful. It's a fantastic central performance from Oscar Borregi, who was in a previous, brilliant in a previous episode as well. And yeah, it's really done quite sensitively. It's not overdone. The sort of ghosts of the prisoners that are the ones that ultimately punish him are played really well, played very sensitively. It's pitched perfectly, and I think it's a really good episode. So Rod Serling does do these political episodes sometimes, and they tend to be anti-totalitarianism, anti-dictatorship, and specifically quite often anti-Nazi. The next one is Midnight Sun, and Midnight Sun is another really good episode. This is a nice little batch of episodes. The Midnight Sun starts with this opening narration. The word that Mrs. Bronson is unable to put into that hot, still, sodden air is doomed, because the people you've just seen have been handed a death sentence. 1 month ago, the Earth suddenly changed its elliptical orbit, and in doing so began to follow a path which gradually, moment by moment, day by day, took it closer to the sun. And all of man's little devices to stir up the air are now no longer luxuries. They happen to be pitiful and panicky keys to survival. The time is 5 minutes to 12, midnight. There is no more darkness. The place is New York City, and this is the eve of the end. Because even at midnight, it's high noon, the hottest day in history, and you're about to spend it in the Twilight Zone. And this one is written by Rod Serling again, and this has got a really downbeat, pervading atmosphere of what's the word? Frustration, because of this intense heat that's making everything go to the wall. You know, you've got two main characters in this: an older woman and a young woman. The young woman is kind of the point of view character, if you like, but she's mostly in this room with this older woman who's more of a panicked state. And there's people dying from the heat. Resources are useless or being depleted. There's lots of fear of violence outside. There's a moment in the middle of the episode where a man is banging on the door, and that gets really tense. And he does come in. It's a really cool scene the way that plays out. But he's desperate as well. It's a really good episode, and it's interesting that it's decades before we were talking about climate change, but it's all about this intense heat because the axis of the Earth has changed, and the heat has become unbearable and really dangerous. So that's kind of interesting. There is a twist in the tale, and I won't tell you what it is, but ultimately it kind of flips it, and in an unexpected way. It's kind of interesting ending that kind of caps it off. But the ending isn't really the focus of the episode. The focus, because most of the episode has this consistent drive about this unrelenting heat, and that's the power of the episode. So yeah, fantastic episode, Midnight Sun. I think it's one of the good ones. And then there's Still Valley. Still Valley starts with this opening narration. The time is 1863, the place the state of Virginia. The event is a mass bloodletting known as the Civil War. A tragic moment in time when a nation was split into two fragments, each fragment deeming itself a nation. This is Joseph Paradine, Confederate cavalry, as he heads down towards a small town in the middle of a valley. But very shortly, Joseph Paradine will make contact with the enemy. He will also make contact with an outpost not found on a military map, an outpost called the Twilight Zone. Still Valley is the weakest one out of this batch. It's not a particularly strong episode, I'd suggest. It's another one where Rod Serling is talking about war, and this is specifically about the Civil War, and you've got a Confederate soldier that's confused about what he can see around him, and there's all these people that are just literally still, they're stationary, and they won't move, and these are kind of Yankee soldiers, and they're really still, and he's trying to interact with them, he's trying to threaten them, and they won't move, he doesn't really understand what's going on. The difference with this one to the other episodes that have had a similar kind of premise is that this is all based around witchcraft. So he meets this old man who said, and the old man says that he's the one doing it. So that's a little bit different. But ultimately, the Twilight Zone's done this sort of thing before and better, and I wasn't massively impressed. But it's still Twilight Zone, and you know, even the weaker ones are really good. But yeah, it's definitely the weakest one out of this batch, I'd say. But yeah, that was that one. And then, to finish off this little batch, you've got an episode called The Jungle. And The Jungle begins with this opening narration. The carcass of a goat, a dead finger, a few bits of broken glass and stone, and Mr. Alan Richards, a modern man of a modern age, hating with all his heart something in which he cannot believe, and preparing, although he doesn't know it yet, to take the longest walk of his life, right down to the centre of the Twilight Zone. The Jungle is written by Charles Beaumont. So Charles Beaumont's written quite a few now, and this has got a really interesting premise that, again, takes the Twilight Zone in a different kind of direction. It starts off with a woman, the wife of this big executive guy. She's frightened of this curse. They've just come back from Africa, and she's frightened of this curse that's been put on them. And he sort of laughs it off or whatever, or says doesn't take it seriously. But then he starts to take it seriously, and when there's a couple of things that happen that make it very real. And basically, this episode is all about this curse because this company that they're working for is directly affecting this African tribe that is putting this curse on these people, and specifically this man that's the main character of the episode. And it's just really interesting because the sound design is all very African, and you've got lots of jungle noises, and you've got the African music in his head as he's terrified walking through the streets thinking that he's going to get attacked. And it's not a lot of dialogue. It's a lot of that sound design really that kind of dominates the episode. I think it's really good. And it kind of, the ending is where that story is going to take it. You know, it follows through what it's suggesting. But yeah, it's interesting to see how that curse gets him. So yeah, a nice batch of episodes that includes the incredible episode It's a Good Life. Season 3 has its moments, so that's definitely one of them. And we'll carry on with this as we go along. But this is episode 13, so this is halfway through my exploration of the Twilight Zone. So please comment below if you've seen any of these episodes or if you're intrigued by these episodes. Thanks for watching. Stay curious, everybody. Wait.
Picture of what it's like to be you.